So, in this episode, we're going to discuss the history of money. Almost a year ago, I'd written an article for the publication called Your Story, I think on the anniversary of Bitcoin, where I wrote this long article on what the history of money was actually like. Why did we come up with currency? How is it related to trust or labor? Where did the barter system come up from? So, I made a short kind of history of it, and I thought I'll make it into a deck and put across in a way that you can understand. So, if you step back into 6000 BC, that is before Christ, you wouldn't be completely taken aback by the barter system. It was introduced by Mesopotamian tribes, and bartering allowed people to trade goods of value amongst themselves. Some people were really good at fishing, some at raising livestock, some at growing grains, and some at producing furniture. We've spoken about this before, right? This is where the last name idea comes from. And you can see in this image, people are just trading things. There's no concept of money or currency. If many people want something, it becomes valuable in public perception. In the barter system, both parties needs to have what the other wants, and there's never a standard price of any good or service. So if you had, a cow and another person had some wheat, you would agree on spot how many cows equals to how many grams of wheat, right? There was no standard. A person who has only a minor need for apples will pay significantly less than a person who is craving apples and has the financial capacity to buy them, even if they're all located in the same area. The price of an object is dependent on public perception, not on its actual value. Now, I repeat that twice because the image on the left is an image of tulips. There was a period of time where it was called the tulip bubble, where a lot of people came in and started buying tulips at an extremely high price. So a lot of public perception went into kind of hyping up what the value of a tulip is. And this tulip mania, as people called it, created something like a bubble, which is a speculative excess. And this is simply because of illogical public perception. So you'd find a tulip for what is the equivalent of almost $200 today, right? So that's what the price had bubbled up to. And then finally people said, hey, I think we're overvaluing this, and everything fell. Now, this is a difficult concept to grasp, that the idea of money is not static. When we have 10 rupees or $1 or whatever, we always think, okay, that's equal to one bread or one loaf of bread or whatever. We have an idea of what 10 rupees is because we can buy certain things with it. But what we don't realize that idea of what 10 rupees is actually tethered or pivoted to many different objects. And we just have a rough sense of what it's worth, right? But in the real world, for bigger objects, which are not like, small things like a bread or a water bottle or a piece of candy, we don't have accurate numbers on what something is worth. We value them based on our perceptions. When you go to an Apple store and buy an iPhone, you are agreeing with Apple Inc. at that point that an iPhone is worth 60,000 rupees. If you disagree, and enough people in the world disagreed, then Apple would have no choice but to bring the price down. So again, somebody sets a price, but it's only that price if everybody agrees and buys it at that price. Otherwise, the company is forced to correct its price. So the opposite of speculative excess is market correction. So human beings can be gauged if they are trustworthy or not, depending on the situation. Right? You could be fantastic as a tradesman, but you could be horrible as a driver. Right? So it really depends on what situation you look at things from when you talk about trust. One problem with bartering is determining how trustworthy the person you're trading with is. Since there's no central market price for a particular object, vendors can jack up the prices and take advantage of the fact that consumers do not know what the actual price of a good or service is. I keep giving the example of hard drives. Right? So when you buy an internal hard drive for a computer, the price is almost 20 or 30% higher than if you bought an external hard drive, even though it is more expensive to manufacture an external hard drive. And the reason for this is simply because consumers don't know enough. And more importantly, more people want external hard drives than people who want internal hard drives. So even though the cost of producing an internal hard drive is many, many times cheaper than the cost of producing an external hard drive, people still go with the external hard drives. And because of that, there's enough demand for the manufacturers to drive down the prices. Right? So if there's not enough demand for something, manufacturers have no choice but to increase the prices to make the same profits. The biggest drawback with the barter system is that it is woefully inconvenient. right? So not only do you not trust the person you're bartering with, you don't know if they're goats or their chairs. Suppose somebody makes a chair and is selling you a chair. You don't know if the chair is made out of good wood. You don't know if the chair is going to break. You don't know anything. You'll only know a few days later, by which time the other person could be gone. So A, you have trust issues, and B, the barter system is inconvenient. If you're somebody who is selling wheat, it's easy for you to have like 2 or 3 bags of wheat and go to a market. But if you're selling a goat, right, and you have 100 goats to carry around, how do you do that? Like, would you carry it in your hand? Would you put them along? It's pretty inconvenient to kind of sell something that is big. And especially if you're somebody who's carrying large things, like maybe you're selling elephants. And in the past, people did sell elephants. It's even harder, right? Because how do you move those things around? So plenty of issues with the barter system. So in the early 1200 BC, villages has found a solution to this problem, which was the coinage system. The first coins were actually cowrie shells, which is the type of shell you find, on the shores of seas, which are durable, they're handy, they're small, and their unique texture kind of makes them immune to forgery. So you can't just, make a cowrie shell out of ceramic or something like that. But trade was still not standardized. The farther the place was from the source of these shells, the larger the value the cowrie shells carried. In some places, you could buy a horse for one cowrie, while in other places, where the shells were much more abundant, one cowrie had much lower value. So as you can see, one thing that becomes very important for trade is rarity. The more rare something is, the more it is worth. There's a problem with this system too. Because cowrie shells could be found by swimming to unexplored shores, they just had to swim well to literally pick up money lying there on the sand. So people started abandoning their day-to-day labors and they started becoming swimmers. And the best swimmers would go to the farthest shores, get all the cowrie shells and come back. So they were being incentivized for doing something that didn't really add value to everyone around them. So some chose to do just that, and this was posing a problem to the local economy. To counter this, a group of people got together and proposed a new requirement for something to be counted as money. It had to have inherent rarity. It should be difficult to find whatever object was going to represent money. Otherwise, everybody would simply waste time trying to find money lying around instead of figuring out how to add value by creating a good or service. Back then, and even today, a person's net worth is actually a great measure of how much actual value they've added to the people around them. That's why I keep saying money and value are tied to each other, and they are a measure of how much other people trust and how much you have contributed to other people. Gold fit this bill perfectly. It was hard to mine, it could be carried around and stored, and it could be melted into small coins where the weight of the coin exactly represented its value. Gold was also hard to counterfeit as any difference in weight would indicate forgery or tampering. So if you said, I have a 1 gram gold coin and you put maybe 25 milligrams of say some other object, say copper, the minute you tried to weigh it, the weight would go down, right? And you would know that this is not real gold. Gold is also imperishable. Such is our faith in its resilience that people make gold investments even today, many still choosing to trust gold over any available currency in the event of a financial collapse. And we'll come to what a financial collapse is in a little bit. So then people got a little smarter. They started creating something called a standard trade pricing for common goods. A small body of individuals was responsible for overseeing the market and making sure that this trade price control was in effect. This system took a tax for its services and became the government. So it's very simple, right? See, a lot of people wanted to sell elephants, a lot of people wanted to sell wheat, a lot of people want to sell rice, there were people selling chicken, there were people selling finished goods like chairs, and there were other people selling houses. You didn't have the internet back in the day, so how did these people get together and meet each other? This happened at the market. So there's a small circular area that was created in every village where people said every day people are going to come here and sell and buy their goods. So if you come here between 9 in the morning and 9 in the night on this day, you are guaranteed to find someone or many people who want to buy or sell their goods and services. So this became a market. A market was actually a physical place. This place was governed by a government, right? What they did was they erected a massive kind of board where they wrote 1 chicken equal to 5 bags of wheat equal to 4 grams of wool or whatever. They just made some numbers, right? They made a standard idea of what one thing is compared to another thing. And this prevented a lot of these scammers from coming in and trading something at a much higher price than what it's supposed to be. So they started creating standard trade pricing for common goods. Now, if you had something that was rare and nobody saw, you could still come in and charge whatever you wanted. But if you came in with chicken and we knew the weight of the chicken, or if you came in with, say, rice and you knew the weight of the rice and the quality of the rice, there was standard pricing for it. Right? So the government did all of this and they took a small tax for its services. They said, okay, I'll make the market, I'll make the roads to the market, I'll make everything easy for you, I'll make sure nobody robs you, I'll make everything fair, but you give me maybe 10% of every transaction. Right? That's how the first governments actually came in. It was trade related. This usage of gold and other hard to mine precious materials caused another problem: the fear of robbery. Gold coins, being smaller, lighter, and worth much more, opened a new can of worms. Because see, when you own 100 goats, if a thief came in, it's very hard for him to steal maybe 1 or 2 goats. It's just you have to carry it around. But with gold, if you say the entire value of those 100 goats, say if you've sold 100 goats to somebody and you got maybe a handful of gold coins and you keep it in your house, it's very easy for a thief to come in and just take all of it and run away. Right? So robbery was much easier because people didn't have the security back then that they did today, right? So the government came up with the idea of the police. A lot of things happened because of trade-related issues. The extremely wealthy had trusted guards, but the middle class suffered from a theft epidemic. Lots of robbery going on. There needed to be somewhere you could store excess gold and only keep enough on you for, say, a month's worth of expenditure. So I might just keep 1 gold coin with me, but my other 100 gold coins I can keep in a safekeeping, right? Some place where nobody would touch it. Early banks solved this problem. Merchants preferred to store their gold with the Goldsmiths of London, who possessed private vaults that guaranteed safety and trust. So a group of individuals came in, they made a big building with a lot of security, with a lot of gunmen, and they said, I will keep your gold for you. You don't have to pay me anything. Right? I will just protect this gold and make sure that nobody touches it so that you can sleep at ease. Trust became a critical factor in the choice of bank. The more guards you had, the better your security, the more steel you had on your vaults, the less likely that you would get robbed. So more people came and trusted you. The more stories of guaranteed deposit and return, the more merchants using the bank. Right? So every time you put in money in the bank kind of wrote it down. Once security became easy to guarantee, banks started offering out loans. Now, liquidity is an important concept to understand here. If somebody invests money with the bank, they don't take it out immediately. So banks can technically lend out some of the money that's been invested in them. To coax more people into investing in them, the banks offered an interest on the sum deposited. So if you came in and you put in money in a bank, it's free for you. Not only is it free for you, but the bank will also give you a little bit from all the lenders who've taken your money, as long as you don't take your money back quickly enough. The longer you keep your money in the bank, the more money you would be offered in return. The concept of a loan, and this is a loan, allowed banks to lend out money at a specific interest rate. As long as this rate of interest on loans was higher than the interest rate they were offering depositors, the bank was making money. Now, one thing that most people don't realize that traditionally, the biggest lenders in the world, or the most wealthy lenders in the world, are actually insurance companies, not banks. And the reason for this is that when you put money in an insurance company, when you buy private insurance for yourself, you often tend to continue paying the insurance for a long period of time until something happens to you. Whereas with the bank, you put in money and you take it out fairly quickly. But with insurance companies, you put in this money and you keep it for a long time. So the insurance companies have a lot of money that they can lend out to other people, which is an important concept to understand. So the longer you keep your money with any lender, with anybody, the more time they have to lend it out to other people. So the better your interest rates. Whereas with insurance, you don't get these interest rates. People forget the value of money. So this is a Starbucks card, right? And I don't know if you guys have heard the story, but Starbucks has more than $1 billion in people who've just topped up the card and not actually used it, right? They've topped up the card maybe for $10 or $20 and they don't use it. And what happens is, because they've already paid Starbucks to top up the card, Starbucks has a lot of money that they can just kind of use and put as a floater, right? So this is exactly how the banks work, except Starbucks doesn't lend out money, the banks do. Right? So this is an important concept to understand, that when you have a lot of people putting in a lot of money into a particular place, even if it's a small amount of money, you have a big float. This also led to the invention of banknotes. When you stored gold in a bank, a slip with the amount and weight of gold was given to you, which you could redeem. To control the demand and supply of these notes and to standardize trade, the government stepped in and started printing the first currency. So people started saying, okay, you put 5 grams of gold with me. Here's a note. Here's an IOU 5 grams of gold. It's on a piece of paper. Take it. Right? So this is, instead of you carrying the gold around, which is still difficult, you need a receipt, right? When you deposit gold, the bank can always say, hey, I don't know who this person is. So the person, just to give that person a little bit of a guarantee, they gave a slip, right? Saying that you have deposited 5 grams of gold. This was an IOU. If you ever show the slip, you will get your 5 grams of gold back. So the government started printing these notes and they said, why do you even need gold? Let's just use these notes directly. Right? Let's just say that this is worth 5 grams of gold or this is worth 20 grams of gold, and let's just use that directly. So if you want to pay somebody, instead of you giving them gold, just give them one of these notes that is bank issued. So the government actually created a proxy for gold without using gold itself. Now, to control the supply and demand, the government stepped in, they started printing these currencies, and a seal or print on the note would guarantee its authenticity so that not any random person would be able to print it. So on the left, you can see some of those gold notes by banks. I think it's on the bottom. And the top, you can see a £1 by the Bank of England. So these were the old kind of IOU notes, which were replacements for gold. The bank also became a verifier of transaction between people. Now, you don't understand why a verifier is necessary till you understand the use cases of a verifier. If person A wanted to make a big payment to person B, it could so happen that person B claims that said payment hasn't taken place at all. Say I want to give you 5 rupees, right? And you take the 5 rupees and then you run away with it. That's okay, right? It's a small amount. But what if I'm paying you 10 lakhs? What if I'm paying you a crore? What if you run away with that money? It becomes scary, right? So people want a witness. People want somebody to say, yes, I did transfer this person 1 lakh. It happened in front of everybody. So the bank maintained a physical register of who paid who, how much money, and at what time. For merchants, this allowed a trusted third party to verify transactions. For banks, this allowed them to warrant a small transaction fee on every such payment. The bank said, if I'm going to witness you sending money to another person and I have to be there and put in my register, I'm going to take maybe a small £1 or a 0.5% fee on this, right? And even today, banks charge transaction fees, right? And that's exactly this. They are the verifier. So whenever they wrote their transaction details to the register, they took a small transaction fee. This register came to be known as a ledger. This process of borrowing and lending continued almost uneventfully until 2008. In 2008, the world was hit by the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. To understand this particular crisis, we must revisit the concept of liquidity. Remember, we spoke about liquidity, where somebody can come in, they can put their gold into a bank, and then the bank can lend out that gold. So when you give a bank $1,000, the bank doesn't actually keep all that money for you, right? It is legally allowed to spend up to $900 of your money and reserve just $100 in the off chance that you ask for your money back. This sounds really stupid, right? It sounds absolutely crazy, right? If I give you $1,000, you can go lend out $900 out of it, right? What if I ask for my money back tomorrow? Well, if you were the only client of the bank would be bankrupt, right? It's a funny joke, but the point is that the only reason banks are allowed to do this is because they have a lot of people who lend them money, right? So they have many people who deposit their money with the bank. So you have thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who put in money. So it's okay for the bank to do this because people rarely withdraw their money. This is called reserve fractional banking, right? Where you're only mandated by the government to keep just 10% in reserve. So what started happening in 2008, the shocking part is that most of these banks, this is exactly how they worked in reality. So what started happening is the amount kept in reserve is just 10% for most banks. This means that if a bank has net deposits of $1 million, it only needs to keep $100,000 on hand at any given time in case people ask for their money back. And this works most of the time, as long as the bank is able to stay liquid, it's cool. But things can go wrong very quickly. If just a small number of customers begin asking for all of their deposits back, a bank can rapidly become drained of its liquid funds. The financial crisis of 2008 amplified this risk of the banking system. When a bank goes out and gives the remaining 90% as loans, it can become problematic if those loans are at the risk of not being repaid. In the case of the 2008 crisis, bank lent out bad loans to subprime mortgages. Now, we don't need to go into what subprime mortgages are, but the point is the bank lent out a lot of money that they shouldn't have to people who they knew wouldn't pay back. And this wasn't because of the banks, right? This was because of the salespeople at the banks. Because the commissions for the salespeople at the bank, say you're a sales guy at the bank, and you only make that commission money if you're able to sell enough loans. Right? If you're able to make enough people take loans from the bank. So people went out and said, yeah, I'm going to give this guy a loan. I'm going to give this guy a loan because I make money. Right? So a lot of people became selfish in the system. They tried to keep selling out a lot of loans, which they knew wouldn't be repaid just to make their own money. And the people who could not repay their loans, they didn't have to suffer. It was the people who had deposited money in the bank who couldn't take their money out because the bank simply said, hey, enough people are not repaying their loans. We don't have the liquidity or the money to give a depositor his money back. These mortgages were taken out by borrowers, very likely not to repay. This led to a big financial crisis because, say, thousands of people came in and they said, I want to take my money back. I need to buy groceries on it. I need to pay for my school fees. And the bank simply said, I'm sorry, I don't have cash. We don't have cash. It's like an ATM that doesn't have money, right? You can go to the next ATM or you can use bank transfers, but assume none of those features work. How are you supposed to pay someone, right? So the banks were struggling to give their money back. The people couldn't withdraw money, even though they had money. It's not like this is money you don't have. The bank actually has registered this money, but it simply wasn't happening. This led to a big financial crisis. And, in the last image, I think we have George Bush talking about the financial crisis. They made tons of changes to make sure banks keep more money in reserve, right? So this is the system as we had it today. And, during this time in 2008, 2009, the blockchain system came in, the Bitcoin system came in to prevent a disaster like this, to make sure that, people are not just randomly giving out loans without having enough liquidity. So we've understood the concept of contribution. We've understood the concept of trust, barter system, liquidity. We've understood how banks work. We've understood loans. And we've understood that at the end of the day, money is a proxy for trust and contribution, right? So stop demonizing money and start understanding how you can add value to the world so you can make more money. At the end of the day, whether you add value to the world or whether you make money, when you give the world what it needs, money is a side effect, right? And as long as you understand that, you will stop fearing the idea of money. Thank you.